Noon. All right, the recording has started. Welcome, everyone. Welcome to Welty at Home. We are the slow reading virtual book club that alternates works by Eudora Welty with works by authors connected to Welty in some way. Right now, we are reading the 1941 collection of short stories titled A Curtain of Green and Other Stories. And during this series, we're reading and discussing 3 stories each week. Today, we are discussing Why I Live at the PO, The Whistle, and The Hitchhikers. And I will remind you that we are about to take a 4-week winter break, so we will not meet December 25th to January 15th, and we're going to resume on January 22nd. So I'm Jessica Russell. I'm the director of the Eudora Welty House and Garden, and I'm joining you with my friend, Eudora Welty's friend and biographer, Suzanne Mars. She is professor emerita at Millsaps College, and she has been guiding and leading these discussions for many years now, for which we are very grateful. If you want to join these discussions, remember to, if you want to comment or ask a question, just hit the reactions button at the bottom of your screen and select the raise hand function. If you're on a tablet or phone, sometimes you have to tap the screen to see that. Also, keep an eye on the chat. There's usually a great discussion happening in there as well. Lots of enriching things to see on this hour that we'll be together. But with that, Suzanne, shall we begin?
Let's begin. We had 2 questions from last time, and I've come up blank on both of them. I looked in newspapers.com to find out if I could see anything that might have occasioned the word raid in Petrified Man, and I didn't find anything. Did anyone else find anything? We can keep looking. And the other question was a discussion of McCullers and Welty, and there, of course, Louise Westling in her book, Sacred Groves and Ravaged Gardens, talks about both Welty and McCullers, but she doesn't compare The Key and Heart is a Lonely Hunter. And I didn't find the reference. I think I've read it. I've read an article on this, but I cannot locate it right now, but I'll keep looking again. So see what we can find. If anyone knows, let me know. Okay, let's talk about Why I Live at the PO, which was a story published in the Atlantic in 1941, probably written in 1940. Maybe we should start with Catherine Ann Porter, who singles out this story in her introduction as a story. You don't want to do it, Harriet? As a story of dementia precox or schizophrenia. And Eudora, in interviews, tactfully, not criticizing Porter, but rejected this interpretation of the story and took it in another direction, suggested another direction. So shall we start there? Does anyone want to comment on what they think the story is about, whether Catherine Ann Porter got it right or wrong? Maybe we all agree she got it wrong. What do you think? Where should we start? Why I Live at the PO. I was getting along fine with Mama, Papa, Daddy, and Uncle Rondo. I have to read this. One of my favorite lines in all of Welty. I was getting along fine with Mama, Papa, Daddy, and Uncle Rondo until my sister Stella Rondo just separated from her husband and came back home again. Mr. Whitaker. Of course, I went with Mr. Whitaker first when he first appeared here in China Grove taking pose yourself photos, and Stella Rondo broke us up. Told him I was one-sided, bigger on one side than the other, which is a deliberate, calculated falsehood. I'm the same. I love that deliberate, calculated falsehood. I'm the same. Okay, so why start like this? Why this story? Any suggestions? Any takers? Hey, go ahead, Gilbert.
Well, I will start out by saying I certainly don't think she's schizophrenic. It establishes the personality of I've forgotten her name.
Sister.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
establishes the personality. She's clearly one of these people that thinks as they talk. They're a very verbal person, so it seems like a very typical personality type, and it's fun right from the start to see how this person's going to be expressing herself to us and telling us her side of this of this story of family difficulties. But I agree. I think it's a wonderful opening line, and really lays out the basic situation in just a few short sentences.
All right, so we've got a dramatic monologue. We've got the speaker is a woman, the postmistress of China Grove, Mississippi, next to the smallest PO in the entire state of Mississippi. And she, and I think you're right, she's unfiltered. She talks. And she is that Southern storyteller, and she's going to tell her story from her point of view. Yeah, Jo Ellen.
The largest context for this teeny town, China Grove, with the next to second smallest post office in Mississippi, is the world. I mean, they refer to the moon, the stars, like I want the whole world to know. Stepping in, coming in a step, it's set during World War II. In fact, there's only one break when Sister shuts up, and we come to the present moment. She takes a break. It's in the last page, and I think that's when she refers to, she just sits in the PO listening to the war news coming in. So we have a portrait of home, and not only that, we have a portrait of the home front, crazy Southern families hijinks that sound more and more like cartoons as we go through the story. But that starts on Independence Day, on July 4th, when Stella Rondo, who breaks things and separates and flies off, comes home. And I love the reference by Mama to July 4th or the day after. And it just, I mean, this is way out there. But Henry David Thoreau struck out for his cabin in the woods on July 5th. So anyway, there really are these kinds of contexts that bring us in to this woman and her audience in the PO. Not until late in the story does she actually use the word you, but audience is signaled throughout. It's not an interior monologue. We know she's speaking to someone. Remember that I said this? And she makes a face, I look like this, etc. So we know exactly that situation close up. So coming in from the status of the world.
The world versus China Grove. Now, the war news would have to be war in Europe, because
right.
This was published before we entered the war. But listening to the war news, the world outside, and that sense of the smallness, the carefully delineated borders of China Grove, and the focus, almost total focus on that very tiny part of the world. Yeah, not tiny to her, but tiny. Harriet. Whoop, can't hear you, Harriet.
Is that better?
Yeah.
You got me now? Okay. It amazes me that Catherine M. Porter takes a story which is about something so familiar, sibling rivalry, and turns it into the exceptional of schizophrenia. But I don't think you have to go that far. I think the pleasure of the story is that it is a family situation that we're familiar with. But I've been thinking about this story and all the stories actually today in connection to Robert Penn Warren's argument that the Welty stories are about love and separateness. And I've been thinking more specifically about Welty's interest in her character's storytelling as a strategy for the hope of transforming separateness one way or another. And her fictions are full of characters telling stories intended to transform separateness. In Curtain of Green, we've already seen Steve and Keela, and now we have Sister, and soon we'll have Powerhouse's Song. But the list of storytellers in Welty's work is legion. And here's the point. As often as not, these character stories fail. Sister intends to be heard and so validated and accepted, but her use of language and narrative builds comic distortion, and we, her listeners, are distanced from her by amusement. She portrays herself as selfless, blameless daughter who has lost her improved family position that she's created for herself by outlasting her family-favored sibling at home. When Stella Rondo returns and the previous family structure looms, sister delivers wonderful lines about her victimhood, deadpan. So we laugh when she twists the criticism of others, often comically interpreting their figurative language literally, like being one-sided. Or like when she spends her doctor's disapproving judgment that she was the most sensitive person he'd ever seen in his whole life, to be not about her capacity for registering slights and causing havoc, but rather to be medical confirmation of her suffering. Her story delights us, I think, in part because it's so remarkably incompetent as a strategy for ending her isolation. As she's talking to us, as Joellen suggesting, the audience is really important. And her story, on the one hand, promotes her blindness and her faults. And on the other hand, our understanding of them as the agents of family chaos, leaving us with a story kind of between us, separating us. We laugh over her head with Eudora Welty. And at the same time, we sense Welty's sympathy for sister in her need and intention to connect with an audience, to be loved in her story. But this story, her strategy isn't a good one. Doesn't do what she needs.
All right. Yeah. So it's a dramatic situation. It's the dramatic, not the interior monologue, the dramatic monologue. And she's talking to us, and she thinks she's defending herself, but she's really revealing herself. And it's about, as Eudora said, it's about Southern storytelling, and it's about the need, if you live in a place like China Grove, Mississippi, which is not the world, which is not New York City, which is not even Jackson, it's a need to dramatize things, to bring some sort of excitement to your world, and to have something of interest going on. Yeah. Jessica.
So as Harriet and Joellen were talking about all this richness of drama, everything that has sprung forth from this story, Suzanne, I was hoping that you would tell the group, for any of us who don't know or want a refresher, about how this story got inspired. Part of which goes back to Eudora Welty seeing an ironing board in a little post office somewhere.
That was the start of it. Traveling around. Now, Eudora herself said, Tom Royals and John Little, who had been in her class at Millsaps, were interviewing her about this story. And they said, well, is it important that you wrote this story after seeing someone who, in a little country post office, who had set up an ironing board back behind the counter, behind, she would have a little window in front that she would look out and sell stamps. And then back behind it, there was an ironing board, and she was back there ironing. And Eudora said, oh, that wasn't important. And one of the boys said, well, I think maybe it was. I like to know how stories happen. And it is interesting. So what Eudora said to him then was, was the spark. It lit the fire. But I was thinking about how people like to dramatize themselves and tell stories and bring some excitement into their lives. And I was thinking about families and rivalries, so that it came from that travels. And I looked to find out. I could not find out for sure. I have the feeling that this site came to her. She encountered this post office when she was working for the WPA. I don't know that for a fact. Somebody else may have the proper citation. But certainly when she was traveling around Mississippi and looked back in that little post office and saw the lady ironing. Yeah, Jacob.
I also think, I think this is not a exciting reading, but it's hard to look at this story without the context of Virginia Woolf's feminist take on a female writer, a woman who just wants a room of her own. That's all she wants. And this is a comic dramatization of that. But I would also add to that, I think any type of writer, that's all they want. I'm going to add it to the chat, but as I understand it, William Faulkner once worked at the post office too, and he was known to be a terrible postman because he sat in the back and wrote. And whenever they would come, he would just look at them like, I'm not going to help you. So
back and played cards or threw the mail away. Yeah. So, yeah, his friend said they used it as a club. They didn't think
So
of
it's
it
in a way, it's a comic tale of the writer coming to being, frustrated with the chaos of the world, of this, of the small town, the community. And another way you could look at this, and I see Katie Fry's in the group, but she's talked about this too, about a lot of Welty's stories arrived during that era of where women were taking the role of men as they went to war. This speaks to Joe Ellen's point as well. This vacuum that's revealed where women are sort of asked to work, but also maintain domestic space. And so we really feel that pressure put on her, the chaos, the frustration with it, the excitement, the hilarity. I think this has one of the funniest lines in Welty's fiction. I love Uncle Rondo when he shows up in his nude kimono and just says, "Sister, I'm poisoned."
He's been drinking the prescription. I don't think Sister is forced to do this because of the war. The war in America hasn't begun. She's gotten, this is a plum. She's gotten it because of Papa Daddy's influence. So she's the postmistress because she's got a position in this town. Yeah, Susan.
Yeah, I was thinking about what Jacob was saying about the contribution to the home and the world. And I mean, one of the things I love in this story is the way she removes all the material goods that she has, that she's contributed to this space, you know, taking down the little vases from the wall.
Wall vases.
Yeah, the wall vases and her radio and the vacuum cleaner and I mean all these things that she has purchased through her own you know, the work that she's doing at the post office. And then she moves and the fan, and she moves those into the post office to set up her own domestic space. I mean, I think so much of that is about the, you know, it contributes to the comedy, but it also just really helps create that world and what's important in the world when those, I mean, to her, as she's kind of burning all her relationship bridges. It's a really fascinating story.
Eudora once said she thought she was going back. She'd go back, she'd leave again. She'd go back, she'd leave again. It's a that sort of you have a family blow up, and then yeah. But yeah, moving on, and even taking the sewing machine that she bought her, that she had paid the most on when they gave it to Mama. I mean, that's pushing it a bit far.
Yeah, so much for gifts.
Yeah, so much for gifts. Harriet.
Yeah, I'm thinking this is I've recently been writing about the whiteness of this story, and that's because Casey Lehman wrote about it in his book Heavy, where he said he didn't just feel an intimate relationship with Welty's text, he felt every bit of Jackson and every bit of Mississippi that you, meaning his mother, had taught me to fear. He said, white folk were capable of anything and not to be provoked. But Welty reminded me what my eyes and ears taught me. White folk were scared and scary as all hell. So scared, so scary. The words scared and scary weren't scared or scary enough to describe them. So that got me rethinking about the story in a way that I hadn't before, about the ways in which these kind of whack white characters who are self-absorbed with first world problems and they're scary in their narcissism. I'm thinking about Stella Rondo now, always had anything in the world she wanted and then she'd throw it away, coming home with what her mama pointedly and meaningfully calls a marvelous blonde child that she insists isn't hers because she's evidently too afraid to confess having been pregnant before married. That is, we're protecting our status. Papa Daddy articulates his regret at having finagled on the merits of his connections. Sister's job as postmistress. He is a kind of comic patriarch who is flashing terror as his daughters threaten his authority, and he's fretfully broadcasting his concern for the fate of his beard that might be cut off by these girls. I just I had never thought about it that way, and I think it works to think about this as a family that are the main people in China Grove, who are dangerous white people because they are anxiously tending their place in the social structure. Yeah, so
Yeah, no, and the way they treat the black characters is so dismissive. Yeah, we turned them loose. We turned them loose on the 4th of July, as if they're slaves. Then a young girl is walking down the sidewalk, a black girl, come help me. Move to the PO, take this wagon. So that the issues of race come up here as well. So that kind of sexual reticence, the standards of correct behavior, do not be pregnant before marriage, do not talk about the facts of life, as Sister says, and then the issues of race are embedded here too. What else? Anything else here you want to talk about and why I live at the PO? I think China Grove is an important character in Why I Live at the PO, and that's in its smallness, in the kind of restricted lives that the characters lead. Beverly.
I know that Welty went back and changed the language, the use of the N-word, and some of her stories at a later date. And I know she did that deliberately. You know, it wasn't just a blanket change that she made. And I wondered if, and I probably could have looked this up in your book, Suzanne, but I got overwhelmed with Christmas. I wondered why she didn't change the use in this story. I mean, I don't know that it's.
She did change it, Beverly.
Well, in the copy I have, it's all through it.
Collected stories.
She changed it for the collected stories, and they used
okay.
the
Well, I'm in
earlier
the
texts for the Library of
yeah.
America.
I've got the Library of America.
She made those changes in 1980. The
Okay.
editors of the Library of America, Michael Kraling and Richard Ford, decided to keep the first publication at text,
Mhm.
but in the collected stories, this is a copy of it falling apart. It's changed.
All right.
Now,
Right. Well, I've got that copy too, and I thought that it had been changed at some point, but I picked up the Library of America stories and of course saw the words in there. So thank you.
and I think the interesting thing is why she changed it here, because it is sister speaking, and the use of offensive language, it seems to me, is part of what makes sister and the other people, that family, scary for, say, for Kiese. But Eudora chose here to change it, and she didn't choose in other places to change it. So she's done it very selectively and purposefully. And I think probably she was thinking that's not the point of this story. So I will delete it as a word that's offensive to people, and it doesn't really serve the purposes of my story. But I think maybe it did serve the purposes of this story, and maybe it should. Harriet, you go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think I was reading collected stories, and I have to say that I'm a defender of collected stories because of this, because I think that Eudora went through carefully making decisions about the use of language as she's gotten more self-conscious about what the language suggests. And so the idea of going back to the original text, the authoritative text, as the Library of America edition does, has always seemed to me to be the wrong thing to do. But I think, if I'm remembering my rereading in collected stories for this, that she does keep a use or two, at least one use of it in the story. And so she's made very careful decisions about how much she wants and where she wants it when she uses racially derogative language. Yeah.
All right. I hate to move us to the next story on this note, but we're getting short on time. So, and I want to be sure we have time for the other stories, and we can come back. Let's look at this issue as it arises in other stories, and we'll come back to that. And we can talk about whether we prefer the collected stories or the original stories. Okay. The Whistle. Eudora wrote The Whistle after she had been to visit her friend Dorothy Simmons, whose family had a nice place in Utica, Mississippi. And in fact, it was Dorothy's uncle who sounded a whistle in the middle of the night that woke her up, and she came out of her room into the hallway to be met by Dorothy. And what's going on? And Dorothy said, well, it's a whistle because there's going to be a freeze. And the next morning she went out and she saw fields covered with people's clothes and their bedding, everything they had to protect the tomato plants that grew right up to the edge of the houses. So that all comes from reality. The burning of the last log and the kitchen furniture and the chair, that's all part of the author's creative process. So not from observation. So that is the sort of spark for this story. Also, Eudora did take photographs in a town, Copiah Springs, known as Tomatropolis or Tomatotropolis, or however that would be pronounced. And she took pictures of the packers, the tomato packers. And there is one of a young man playing a guitar in a boxcar, the tomato packers. So what do we want? I know this is, Jessica wants this story talked about. So what shall we talk about here? Anyone want to start us off in The Whistle? Cheryl. Oh, nice to see you, Cheryl. You've got your picture on today, but we can't hear you.
Okay. All right. First, let me pull up. I'm getting to it. It's basically about the how Eudora describes the fire, the importance of the fire. So it's a fire still fluttered in the grate, the word fluttered, and that its exhausted light beat up and down the wall like a bird trying to find its way out of the room. And then the fire is a hissing yellow flame. And then the scene where they are out in the plot of land, the garden, and when the moment the reader realizes that they're about to have to take off their clothes to shelter these plants, made me think of the movie that Keanu Reeves was in with the vineyard, and they have to go out and fan and help keep the grapes from freezing. But also, like, if you have a cinematic imagination, just kind of like this, the swirl of the clothing coming down off their bodies, mimicking like that initial bird image that we got at the very opening of the story. And that's just one of my thoughts.
All right. I think you're pointing to the fire is a really important thing. The fire is there at the start. It's a blazing fire at the end, and then it's going to go out. But the fire is associated with what? With imagination, isn't it? With Sarah's memories of Dexter in the summer. The fire is flickering and it's associated with, at the end, when they build the big fire, it was if Jason and Sarah sat in darkness where their bed had been, and it was colder than ever. The fire the kitchen table had made seemed wonderful to them, as if what they had never said and what could not be had its life too, after all. As if what they had never said and what could not be had its life too, after all. So the fire is associated with that ability to imagine a better future for a moment, and for them to do it together, for there to be a moment of communication. It reminds me of a piece of news right at the end. Yeah, Joellen.
Yeah, warmth certainly does.
Yeah.
But I think that the long, vain dream of Sarah, which is presented in Free and Direct Discourse, of festival time, the harvest, a fullness in agricultural life, is when after the fire's gone out. And it's something, she's looking at the past in the deep of the cold. The later fire is in the present and gets at least 2 words out of the husband and wife. The only 2 words spoken, so a real contrast to sister in the story before. But and as the narrator implies in commentary, that it's like they almost could imagine some other life than the exhausting one that they've been living. But then the whistle continues to blow.
The Joellen, what about this? Now the fire's gone out, but Sarah, weightless under the quilt, could think of the celebrations of Dexter and see the vision of ripe tomatoes only in brief snatches, like the flare-up of the little fire.
Ah, nice, yeah.
So that the memory is
Yep.
linked to the fire, I think.
Yeah, good point.
Cheryl and then Harriet.
Harriet was before me, actually.
Okay, Harriet and then Cheryl. Thank you.
I was thinking, Cheryl, that you were probably responding to this and to what you had said. So I was, I wanted to hear you.
Okay,
No?
make a
Cheryl?
decision.
So Cheryl's gonna go.
Go ahead.
I think it was, anyway, what Suzanne, what Dr. Mars just read, the couple is together, but they're separate. Due to poverty, they have been, they are isolated from each other, even though they're physically together. But memory and dream, I just put in the chat, appear in most of the stories. And so when the wife goes, when Sarah goes to start the memories of Dexter, it's like a vain dream. And then when we get to the hitchhikers, there's Harris's and Carol have childhood memories that are important to the story. And that's all, you also see that in a memory. But also with the importance of the fire at the end, when Sarah's husband, I forgot his name, it's like an act of defiance and anger at their impoverished lives when he goes and just starts putting wood into the fire. It's a moment of rebellion. Forget it. We're freezing cold and we want warmth.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. And I think you're also suggesting that the fire for them is, the warmth is suggested with memory, linked with memory, which usually they don't indulge in. They're living from moment to moment. Yeah. Harriet.
I want to back up to frame this discussion with the context of sharecropping. And I'm thinking across to Faulkner's barn burning, another story about the economic agricultural system that replaced slavery, that was is in place in the 30s. And in Faulkner's story, Ab Snopes is our tenant character, and he has a habit of moving his family from farm to farm, moving them into tenant shacks, visiting the big white house, and then burning the barn. It's a story about his anger at the system. I sometimes wish that the Mortons had more of Ab's anger. But what they have instead is a kind of wornness that has affected their relationship. That is, on the one hand, it's sharecropping. On the other hand, it's the natural world. She thinks that now, according to the almanac, it was spring, but year after year, it was always the same. The plants would be transplanted always too soon, and there was a freeze. and in this context, we get their sacrifice, but we also have the damage that's occurred in the relationship. Every night they lay more trembling with cold, but no more communicative in their misery than a pair of window shutters beaten by a storm. Weeks went by without words. Their lives were filled with tiredness, with a great lack of necessity to speak, with poverty, which may have bound them like a disaster too great for any discussion, but left them still separate and undesirous of sympathy. Perhaps years ago, the long habit of silence might have been started in anger or passion. Who could tell now? But that, I mean, I think we're looking at an economic wearing on this couple that has produced damage in the relationship, and then the fire, and what does it mean, and how do we read the end of the story?
I think so too. And Mr. Perkins owns their land now, which suggests that they have lost their land. They have become sharecroppers. They are victims of that system. And, that hard handshake when they turn over their crop, and they're still stuck in poverty after this crop. And then also that the natural world, the power of the natural world, the plight of the farmer in the natural world. So what we make of the ending is another question. I'm with Cheryl. I think it's this big act of rebellion, but it finally, and I think it does prompt a kind of emotional union of the couple that they haven't had. They respond together, but then it's gone. And they are left with nothing. Yeah. Susan and then Joubert.
I mean, when you just said natural world, I mean, as being another kind of factor in the wearing of these characters down, as well as the kind of agricultural system, and that really struck me. The opening of this story, night fell. I mean, we might almost expect, as we see that we're getting a description of a farm, that there would be some sort of positive natural elements to this somehow. But no, I mean, the darkness is like some sleazy dress that always lets the cold through. The farm is like a white stone. The deep woods are characterized by colorless dead leaf. Even the tomato plants, which are alive, are gray and feather-like, appalling in their exposed fragility. And then the moonlight that covers everything, which is just a cold moonlight at this stage, illuminates the darkest shape of all. So it's such a kind of depressing, but also image of this life, but it also seems to forecast everything else. It's just
the whistle is still going at the end.
Yeah.
There are those memories that are in color, in Technicolor, of Dexter.
Yeah.
But
and it's great that they're tomatoes because they're red,
yeah.
And there's no other color in this story.
Joubert.
I had a very, very strong response to this story, and I think that there's a piece of it, the various types of analysis and symbol interpretation and all that is very useful. But I think there's a call to action in their response to the people we run across who live in this poverty or near this kind of poverty who are struggling. I'm feeling a response not unlike the Grapes of Wrath. But of course, in hundreds and hundreds of fewer pages, you still evokes that compassion for the people we run into at the stores and the shops and the restaurants and the places we go, where there are people who are in situations not unlike this.
There was in the Delta. They found it during the Depression, a Southern Tenant Farmers Union. I can't remember exactly. I think So STFU, I think that's right, Southern Tenant Farmers Union. But of course, that's not brought into this story, a way of trying to combat it, which was also ineffective finally, I think. Harriet.
Yeah, I'm thinking how terrible the system was. I mean, you know, this story doesn't go into, but many stories about it do, where you know the tenants are buying their seed from the company store. They are in debt to the store, where they need to pay off with their promised crop, and they may not have made more than the crop, and then they are going to spend their money to get supplies to the company store, and the hopelessness of it. But I was really responding to the imagery of the dress, and the fact that Sarah takes off her dress in that powerful scene, as she reaches down, pulls her dress off her head, and her hair falls out of its pins, and she begins to tremble violently. The skirt is full and long, and the rest of the plants were covered. Is this very female image? But you know, the ending of the story, I have my doubts about it. That is, I think, you know, here they have burned everything that they own, and they have a moment of warmth, and it's transforming for a second, and they speak. She says, "Jason," and there's a silence, but only for a moment. He says, "Listen," in an uncertain voice, and then they hear the whistle. They're listening to the whistle. That seems to me to be just a flicker of hope. I don't know. I always wonder about the ending here, and whether I'm meant to feel as if there's something to go forward that will change the relationship, at least. But the direness of their having emptied the house into flames for that moment of warmth.
Yeah, I must say that that last line, the whistle continued to blow, is ominous. You know. But there has been this moment of union where they communicate and they respond as one. But whether it lasts or not, I don't know. No, it seems unlikely. Yeah. Well, should we talk about the hitchhikers?
I think we should.
Okay, you start us off, Cheryl.
Well, okay, so here's what I'll start with. Oh, I know what I'll start with, because if I was a reader at the time this was published, I wonder how familiar like people were with modern songs, contemporary songs. For instance, Miss Welty gives us two songs, the one Rose that's left in my heart. She assigns it to a group called the Aloha Boys, which I couldn't find online. I only found Johnny Cash's version. And then Love, oh Careless Love. And so if you were familiar with those songs, what impressions you would have going into Harris being alone on the road, going to yet another town, desiring to pick up hitchhikers, who are vagabonds and like nomad travelers like himself, and then the Rose in my heart, you know, but Carol and Ruby could be women in another town, any town.
So
I think
yeah,
that's what I'd say to start.
okay, you're pointing us in a lot of good directions, I think. The use of music, I want to talk about the guitar too, the fact that one of the hitchhikers has a guitar, the songs that refer to love and the whole question of love and connection and rootedness. Jacob.
Just to build upon the other story. So as I understand it, you know, a national image in the 30s during the Depression, this is kind of speaking to Harriet's point, was the sharecropper. That were these giant, you know, black and white images of kind of heroic people struggling against the elements, kind of culminating in a way with the Grapes of Wrath, which was already also mentioned. And in addition to the sharecropper, there's also the national image and the concern of, I guess, who was called the tramp, the people who are displaced, people who are on the run, people leaving their communities. The wide world is kind of crashing down on those people, and they don't have homes anymore. We really sense that in this story. And in my, I guess, reading this time around, I would add to the tramp context. This, maybe this is a stretch. There's queer readings of this story. Why is there violence at the end? Why did they suddenly attack each other? What is the weird tension between these two men? We hear one of them has a bold and gay burden in his hands. There's a lot of strange energy between the two men. And we don't know where they come from and what their desires are, I guess, is what I wanted to add to the table.
All right, great. So pointing us in two other directions, I think we can go. One is to talk about the nature of the hitchhiker, which would have been, nowadays, I wouldn't even think about picking up a hitchhiker. But in the 30s and 40s, it was very common. And when I was a younger person and traveling in England, that was a common thing to do then. I don't think that's common there anymore. I don't know. But so here we've got the hitchhiker, these people but they're abandoned to it. They're not just hitching to go from town to the next town to see a friend. They're constantly on the road. And then the gay readings of the story. So anyone want to talk about any of these things that Jacob and Cheryl have raised? Any of these points? We might say that this story also, another biographical context, I think Eudora did not know the Delta that well, but her friend John Robinson, the man she was in love with, was from the Delta. He had worked as an insurance adjuster traveling the Delta, and she had driven through the Delta with him. And he was very, I don't know, self-contradictory in his, I think, attentions to her, sometimes suggesting that their relationship might go somewhere, other times backing away from that. And so that's another element we might think about. Beverly.
I think it's interesting, the salesman in this story is so different from R.J. Bowman in Death of a Traveling Salesman, which is her first short story, and it's in this collection, but it's placed much later. So, this guy's hail fellow well met, everybody knows him, they're happy to see him. There's the indication that he's, comes into town and buys drinks and maybe has relationships with women. And I wonder what would have changed in her view, Eudora's view, of the traveling salesman from the beginning, from that first story, which is a beautiful but very, very sad story, to this one, which is also sad but violent as well. And we just have two very different salespeople here.
But both of them, even though they're different from each other, both of them are unable to establish relationships.
Right.
In Death of a Traveling Salesman, he thinks a marriage, a fruitful marriage, anybody could have had that, but he hasn't had it. And here Tom is aggressively avoiding enduring relationships. Yeah, Harriet.
I guess I want to add to the list of things that we're not solving, but bringing up in relation to the story, the fact that it is a crime fiction, that it is a mystery, a murder mystery. As we thinking about the book that Jacob and I have done recently, I can't help but bring that frame to this story. And I think there are two ways of reading the story. One is to have a sense of that the mystery is solved, and the other one is that the mystery gets thickened, that it's not solved, and that to typical Welty's work, we come away with a sense of the unsolvability mystery. But I was thinking about the language of tramp and hobo, which comes up in the story, the distinction, because it's so unfamiliar to me. And I've read that a hobo was a migratory worker, a tramp was a migratory non-worker, that a bum was a stationary non-worker. That there are these concepts of the hobo and the tramp that just don't exist any longer. I think that the queer reading of the story, that there is same-sex attractions between Harris and the two hitchhikers. That's the one where the mystery is solved. I think where there is a lot of things fall in place if you read it that way. That is Harris's lack of interest in the women in the story, his strong interest in Sanford, the inexplicable rage of Sabi, Carol's empathy. When she talks to him about remembering how he played the piano, and telling him that she's hopes his friend will be all right, emphasizing the friend. But I tend to lean towards the other reading, that is the mystery reading, where we have a sense that Harris drives on, not knowing what has happened to create this violence.
He drives on, he has the car cleaned, he leaves the guitar. He's not going to be held by this any more than he's been held by anything in the towns, I think. So it's part of this detached, to me, it seems part, I am willing to hear all readings, and I think they shed light, but the one that is compelling to me is this notion of Harris as a man who cannot make commitments, who has no past. He's free, he's helpless. He's different from these people in the towns with their rooted past. He doesn't want roots, but it leaves him in despair, helpless. And I want to come back to the guitar eventually, but Cheryl, you first.
I don't know whether Harris wants to be a bachelor or not. My interpretation was that I don't think he knows. I don't think he knows what he wants. So at the beginning of the story, Harris would get sleepy driving. On the road, he did some things rather out of a dream. So that's dream and memory again. And then the sky gave him a flash of a sensation he had known as a child, standing still, et cetera, et cetera. So dream, memory, child memory. And then when he's walking to Ruby's house, he doesn't know what town he's in. It could be any town. And when Carol comes to the window, he has to remind himself, think about who she might be. But the importance of Carol's memory of Harris, I think we can connect when we talk about it next meeting to the ruminations of the little girl in a memory.
All right. He thinks when he says Carol, the past and the present joined like this, he thought, it never happened often to me, and it probably won't happen again. The joining of the past and the present, it never happened often to me. Yeah, Jessica. Oh, no.
No, it's not that. This is just a comment. This is not a very academic comment, but I couldn't help but notice what a tender portrait she had of this collie in the midst of this violent story with all the stuff going on that all these points that we've raised. There is a familiar collie and he's dying. And I just thought that there were a lot of details. I'm not really sure why she added in the details of his name is Mike's health, but I know that the family raised collies, and I just kind of wondered if losing a pet had been something that she experienced a little recently when writing this story.
And dog lovers like Jessica and I respond strongly to that. Okay, Joellen, what do you say?
I like Harriet's sharing of the definitions of tramp, bum, hobo. I just want to add also to what Jacob noted about images of representing the 30s of sharecroppers and tramps. The title of the story is Hitchhiker. Even though I think on the second page, what's his name? Harris distinguishes between hitchhikers and tramps, and it was the presence of the guitar, something that moved with Sanford. But traveling salesmen also seem rootless. Sharecroppers are rootless enough. They had to move sometimes every year. And Ruth does call Harris a vagabond by the end. I don't think there's any serious connection to Sanford, even though Carol calls him your friend. I think that's an assumption she's making. He was amused by him. His cheek would twitch when he's amused, and Carol waits for it to twitch at some point when it doesn't, because he's obviously not amused. But he keeps moving and is associated more with Memphis. That was really his goal, where he was driving. In a city, it's easier to be rootless, and getting away from the stable points of people that he knows in these towns, even though he mixes them up. I want to draw attention, though, to one other thing that happens in this small town. While Harris is driving the guitar player to the hospital, he has a procession of little kids on their bikes weaving in and out. Welty is known for the processions that she has often in her stories. I'm not entirely sure what to make of that, except that they're weaving around Tom Harris, who wouldn't voluntarily have been part of a procession. And then the last people he sees in the town are the little boys wearing their colorful shirts again. And the last one asks for the box. That's what, and he gives that away, but he wants it. So anyway, we get yet another image of what happens in the town. And they're all boys, mind you, not girls.
The town is run down. The Dulce Hotel is not the Ritz. The hospital is a ramshackle hospital. And Jessica, I think Mike is part of that. The dog dying, the town on its, not flourishing, the flatness of the land, which is very fertile, but that's not stressed here. It's the flatness, the seeing miles, 20 miles you can see, the flatness of life, the decay of life. I see Mike as part of that. I don't know. Yeah, Cheryl.
So I won't read the whole passage, but when we're introduced to the hitchhikers, Sabi is the quiet one, the silent one that gets angry, and that the talkative one wants to steal a car from someone who has helped them. But the guitar player, he says that that one of the songs is most the same as a ballad, and my mom, she was the one for ballads. And when his father would come home drunk and so forth, she would pick up and go sit on the front step facing the hill and sing. And that's more love, separateness, marital connection, poverty, dysfunction, etc.
I'm going to come back to the guitar before we quit for today and say, if you're hitchhiking and you're carrying a guitar, you do have a burden. I mean, guitars are big. I tried to learn to play one. I've got them. I could bring it in here now, and I wouldn't even think about trying to get in somebody else's car with it. So he's going with this guitar, which should be a way of, you could play for other people, he says, but the band only plays for himself. He doesn't play to make money. He doesn't play to connect. So there's that sense of kind of solipsistic thing about it. It's where you could play songs to bring people together. You're not. You're doing it all inward turning, self-seeking. And that's why Harris picks him up, because he knows they're abandoned to this. If he's willing to carry a guitar with him, he's abandoned to it. And I think there's a link between, the man with the guitar and Harris. And then Michael Kraling, years and years ago, wrote an essay about Picasso's The Old Guitarist. And he says, Eudora would have seen the old guitarist in Chicago at the Art Institute. And here that image is the dead Sanford cradling the guitar, is very evocative of Picasso. So we might want to think about that too. So, all right. Anything else? How much time have we got? We don't have time. We haven't finished talking about the hitchhikers. So can we start with the hitchhikers a little bit next time? Harriet, you got the final word?
I was just going to say that, Harris gets asked if he wants to keep the guitar, and he doesn't.
does,
He doesn't. Story ends there. Yeah.
And Jacob has posted that Picasso to the chat if anyone wants to see it.
Oh, thank you, Jacob.
Beverly, we have time for just one more. Do you want to say something before we leave?
Well, I was just going to ask, do we believe the murderer when he says that that the guy with the guitar was the one who wanted to steal the car? Are we to believe him? I mean, I didn't believe him, but I
think it's left up in the air, don't you? That
yes. Tom even says that. He wonders.
Yeah.
And sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say they were back in the car. They were both back in the car. And the I don't know, maybe the guitar player was in the passenger seat slumped over his guitar. He couldn't have had it right in front of him if he'd been sitting in the driver's seat. But anyway.
I have a transcript of a letter. I don't know where I got it from. Yes, the things you used to know. But I found on my computer a transcription of a letter that Welty wrote to someone who had tried to create a dramatic version of the story, and Welty is correcting her. And one of the things she corrects is the sense of being able to trust who was stealing the car. That we just don't know.
There is a film of the Hitchhikers, by the way. It's a good one. Patty Duke is in it, plays Ruth. But what I would say, I think Joe Ellen's point is a good one. If you're cradling the guitar, you could not be in the driver's seat. On the other hand, what Sabi says is that it was his idea to steal the guitar, to steal the car. And so it would be in his interest to place the blame on someone else rather than himself. But so you're saying Eudora said that it was unresolved. Is that right?
I don't know. I'll try to pull that passage out and share it from Nick.
But to me, I think it is somewhat unresolved, but I do think Joe Ellen's point is a good one. If you're cradling a guitar, you can hardly be driving the car. So there you are. Okay, Jessica, we'll call it quits there.
All right, that sounds good. And this was so wonderful. We are going to take a winter break, December 25th through January 15th. So return to us on January 22nd. We are going to discuss A Memory, Cletty, and Old Mr. Marble Hall. Thank you so much.
Happy Christmas. Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas.
Happy holidays.